I'm Daniel Shaked. I'm the founder and CEO of Home 365. Just few logistics before we start. All of you are muted, so we have a quiet background. If you do want to ask a question at any time, please use the chat button at your lower side. You just can type any question you might have, and we will moderate the questions to the speakers. If you click on participants button there, you can raise hands, you can answer questions with yes, no's, and indicate any specific issue that you might have, but that's your ability to contribute and participate. If at any point anyone wants to ask a verbal question, you can raise your hand. We'll open your microphone, so you will be able to ask that question, and we'll provide an answer. But the best way to do it is through the chat, because there might be some duplicate questions right now. We will be recording. Recording this session, which actually I didn't do yet. So I'll be.
I did it.
Oh, you did it. Okay, so it's recording right now. Yeah, it's recording. So definitely this session is recorded, and we will distribute this session afterwards to every participant and those who couldn't make it. Without further delay, here's our agenda for today. I'll give you a brief idea. Who are we? What we do? What's Home 365? And then we'll transfer the presentation to Mr. John Benedict to talk about the legal updates and how we as a management company right now are coping with COVID-19 problems and issues, and we'll maybe present a certain plan going forward which might make sense and resonate with some of you. So just in a nutshell, very quickly, 2 minutes, we are a technology, fully automated property management company with a very unique value proposition, where we basically ensure the operating income of the rental properties. So pretty much we are offloading the risks from property owners, take the risk on ourselves as the management company, and pretty much guaranteeing the net operating income. That makes the entire process of investing in real estate much more profitable, predictable, and hassle-free. The way we do it is we leverage technology. As I mentioned, we're a technology company, and we predict various expenses, operational expenses, by underwriting pretty much 50 different data points and generating a monthly premium which covers all of those expenses. And pretty much that is a much more affordable way to run and operate the rental. We're now managing close to 600 properties. We are backed by venture capital firms and some corporate venture capitalists, which you might recognize here, like Verizon. We are headquartered in Silicon Valley. This is where I am from. Our main operational hub is in Nevada, in Las Vegas, Nevada, and our R&D center is in Tel Aviv, Israel. Next quarter, we're launching 5 new exciting locations in Charlotte, North Carolina, Reno, Phoenix, Miami, and Atlanta. So we are in expansion mode. And while I mentioned our insurance product, it's a custom tailored due to our ability to leverage technology and automation. We are, there's our executive team. We are across 3 continents. And the most important person you should see on that slide is Ron Neer, who is our general manager and chief broker in Nevada, and Gina Masterson, who runs the operations of our local Las Vegas office. Ron, would you want to say a word?
Unmute.
No, you
Hello,
are
everyone, and welcome to today's session. We on 365 working to be updated in those uncertainty times, so we can still give and continue giving our client investors the best service. This is part of what we are doing today. So again, thank you for joining us, and good to see some familiar faces in the crowd. Thank you.
delay, I would like to invite Mr. John Benedict to discuss the legal implications of the recent COVID-19 regulations and orders. Some background about John. After practicing law for more than 15 years, in 2007, John formed the law office of John Benedict, a transactional and civil litigation law firm representing clients in various legal areas, but focused on real estate and business. Some of the real estate transactions his office handled, both commercial and residential, include all the things like leasing, purchase and sales, development and construction, investment and financing, title and escrow issues, asset and property management. John is a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology, graduating from magna cum laude from the State University of New York, Albany. He is a Juris Doctor degree in 1990 from Pepperdine University Law School. And Mr. Benedict has been a member in a good standing of the California and Nevada Bar since 1990. He is a volunteer advisor to the University of Las Vegas Real Estate School and is an adjunct professor there, teaching the Principles of Real Estate course. Please welcome Mr. John Benedict. John, your stage, please.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't need to beat to death the fact that we are in uncharted waters. I've been practicing law for 30 years, and this has been the most tumultuous time of my career, even worse than the recession starting in 2008, 2009, because at that time, if you weren't in real estate and you didn't have to sell your home, you weren't directly thrown into the middle of the problem. Your neighbors might be your friends and family, but this time everybody was, be it from restrictions on being able to go to work to our normal day-to-day activities. And then on top of that, for what we're here to talk about, major governmental restrictions on doing business in the ways that we're used to. So I wanted to spend the first part of our discussion talking about how did we get here? What are the restrictions? The main restrictions are from the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. And then there are also state directives that we'll talk about. And I want to hit you with a little bit of factual and statistical things that I want you to leave this discussion with. And then some don'ts and some do's, and then we'll take some questions. We'll take some questions along the way. I prepared some slides, which I'm going to go to next. And rather than trying to jot everything down during the presentation, Daniel will make the slides available to the group for whoever wants them afterwards. And so I encourage you to try to listen and take a few notes, but not worry about what the slides say, so that because you'll be able to get them after. With that, let me get started. Okay. I started by saying the eviction moratorium. So as all of us in real estate know, the federal government, certainly for the first time in my career, has made a nationwide ban against eviction, and it's a very broad ban, and it has very severe penalties if you don't follow it. In fact, those penalties are criminal penalties. So why did the federal government do this? Well, obviously it's COVID-19. And the reason I cover this in these first few slides is some of us are going to find ourselves standing in front of a judge trying to justify what we've done and how we've done it. And in order to do that, I think the group needs to know kind of why the government put out such an extreme measure of banning evictions everywhere. And that is not only because, as we all know, COVID-19 is severe, it's nationwide, and it's a virus that is easily transmitted. The CDC's focus for this ban is on how can we stop it from spreading. And so in weighing that policy decision, what the government has done is at the beginning, the enabling part of the rule, of the order, it goes through a lot of statistics a lot of examples from different communities of how this is spread. It analogizes the outbreak in New York to the Spanish flu in 1918 and says basically if we don't protect people by allowing them to stay in wherever they're residing, we're going to either make them homeless or put them into a situation where they have to live in a densely populated place that is more likely to spread the COVID-19 disease. So I want you to understand that that's the mentality behind this. So when one is interpreting the language, one has to be aware of what the policy is behind it. And the policy here is just very, very broad. And so, you know, we're early in the curve in terms of court cases and challenges and so forth. But it seems to me that the courts are going to be well situated to interpret these prohibitions, these restrictions very broadly. And so that's why I wanted to cover that part. As you can see here in the second slide, they have put a temporary halt on evictions until December 31st of 2020. So the time frame for the CDC order is September 4th, obviously already passed, through 12/30 of 2020. And as I mentioned, the penalties are severe. They backed it up with criminal penalties, and as you can see here, the fine can be $100,000 per violation for a landlord or someone who owns the real estate, $250,000 if someone goes out and gets COVID and dies. And then just to make sure that the property managers on the line are, you know, double scared, they doubled the fines for the property managers. So if you're an organization which is targeting property managers and big property owners, then it's $200,000 per violation and can be $500,000 if somebody dies. So what the CDC is saying is, we're going to bring the power of the federal government to bear on all of you who don't follow these rules. And so if you want to take your chances, you know, understand that you stand a significant penalty if the government decides to come after you. And it empowered the U.S. Attorney's Office, which has all the power of enforcement of the federal government, to go after people. I don't know about anybody else on this line, but I would not want the U.S. Attorney's Office coming after me. They have unlimited resources. Okay. We'll see later in the state court, and we'll talk about a nuance between the CDC and the state court that deals with leases that have expired. And I think it's a fair question people have been asking me is, okay, listen, if someone's on a month-to-month or their lease is expired, can I evict them? And so I pulled out the definition of a covered person. The government, in issuing this order, could have chosen to simply say tenant or lessee, but instead they added resident. And resident would be, I think, quite simply anyone who's residing in a particular property. And I don't know for certain because there's no enabling language and there's no legislative debate like you're used to in a federal law. But I think the resident was chosen as a broad word to take the guesswork out of, well, if it's this kind of tenancy or that kind of tenancy or even a holdover tenancy, are they meant to be included? If I were arguing the tenant side, I would say simply, Judge, resident means resident. What else do you need the government to say? The second part about it being a person is just put up on the screen for broad purposes to be able to say to you, look, whether you're an LLC or a corporation or a partnership, however you're doing business or individually, you're bound by these rules. This is what it's meant to anyone that owns real estate, however it's held, trust, etc. It doesn't matter, everybody's bound by it. And a residential property is also meant to be defined very broadly as well, but I did highlight here that shall not include any hotel, motel, or guest house rented or seasonal. And I get the question in Las Vegas, we have a number of short-term rental properties, and I think it's pretty clear that the government is excluding those from the registration or the restrictions. I don't think that it's intended that someone could move into a property here for a week and be able to stay rent-free for a good long period of time. Okay. The other question I get is, are all evictions prohibited by the CDC order? And the answer to that question is no. This is meant to protect for non-payment of rent primarily. Arguably, although we don't have any case yet, about a 30-day notice to get out after expiration. But it is not meant to give a tenant a free pass to do whatever they want. So the order on its face excludes, let's strike that. The order on its face allows for evictions if someone is engaging in criminal activity while on the premises, threatening the health or safety of other residents, damaging or posing an immediate and significant risk of damage to the property. So that's one that I think folks should take notice of. And you don't have to allow someone who's beating your property up to continue to do so. Perhaps they have a pet that they're not supposed to have under the lease and it's doing damage. Those are viable things to take to a court to get a ruling upon. Certainly building codes, health codes, Las Vegas is a different place. People sometimes do stuff they're not supposed to do, illegal stuff, grow stuff, all that is prohibited. And then violating any other contractual obligation other than the timely payment of rent. So if they have other obligations, for example, they're supposed to keep the grass up or keep the pool up, those kinds of things, or they're responsible to maintain the home, or they're not supposed to do certain things, like noise ordinances and so forth. You'd need to give a notice to cure, I believe, but those things can lead to eviction even under the CDC order. It's not a blanket pass to act poorly or illegally on the property. All right, so how does this all get triggered? Tenants, in order to stay in the property, have to give the landlord or the property manager a sworn testimony that the CDC put out the language itself. It's literally attached to the order. And that has to be sworn under penalty of perjury and has to contain these statements that, as you can read, there's best efforts to obtain government assistance, that they earn no more than $99,000 in annual income. They've made the best efforts to make timely partial payments or pay the rent if they can. Importantly, if evicted, they'd become homeless. They still pay the rent or make housing payments. Even if they don't make the payments, they're still obligated. They're acknowledging that, and they have to comply with the other obligations under the lease, and they have to acknowledge that the protection ends on December 31st, 2020. Additionally, the restriction is that everyone who's on the lease has to sign this statement. And so as property managers and landlords, we need to know that everybody has to sign it in order for it to be valid. I also get the question, do interest, penalties, and the like continue to accrue? Can I charge them? The answer is yes. You can continue to charge them. You just can't evict for non-payment of them. So when the amount that you're owed is determined at the end of December, then you can include these back amounts. All right, that's the end of the CDC, Daniel. If there's any questions that have come in that I should answer at this point, or I could keep going.
There's actually a question coming. What happens if the tenants that are not paying actually didn't sign this form that you mentioned before? Can that lead to an eviction if they haven't signed it?
It's a good question. It's going to tie for now at least for now until October 15th, it's going to tie to Nevada. So that kind of segues me into my next point. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but the basic answer to the question is, if it's allowed under the Nevada restriction, which we'll get into here in a second, then then a landlord or property manager could start the process of eviction. However, what I want to say to the audience is that at any point along that process, if a tenant provides the affidavit, that process has to stop. So there's a monetary investment involved to start that process with, the notice and the court case and so forth. And at any point, and I listened to a seminar put on by the real estate folks, and an attorney general and the Nevada State treasurer was on it. And they were saying that, and some of the property managers were sharing their horror stories. They were saying that at the actual lockout, the tenant went in, scribbled down the affidavit, handed it to the marshal, and the marshal threw up his hands and said, "Sorry, I can't do anything from here." There was another example of them going all the way to the court and bringing it to them at the court. There's another example, which I scratched my head about, where the judge actually asked them from the bench if they were aware that they could fill out this affidavit, and they said no, and so he told them to go see the clerk and they could sign it. So I say this, as I shake my head a little bit, but to answer the person's question, yes, you can evict, but can you complete an eviction? Maybe yes, maybe no. If someone presents this affidavit at any point along the process, I think you have to stop, and I think if you don't stop, a court is going to stop you.
Yeah, another one is, if you start an eviction process, is that also might be considered as an unlawful action that might be subject to a penalty? Just starting the eviction, not actually completing it?
I don't think so, because the landlord or property manager hasn't received the affidavit yet. And I think it's a fair question to say, hey, is a property manager or landlord obligated to tell the tenant that they have these rights? I don't read it in the rule as an obligation, and I don't think there is an obligation. So I think if you could, in good faith, start the process, and not having received an affidavit, and you can complete the process without the affidavit, I don't see that as being a penalty. And if you start the process and you stop the process if somebody presents the affidavit, I don't see that as subjecting you to a penalty. I don't know if the
last one.
Go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. And the last one, do they need to provide any supporting documents? Like, what's the process to make sure that they are not simply lying? I don't know.
I'm going to hit myself in the head on this one. No. And you can't ask. I mean, all they have to do is they're attesting to it under penalty of perjury. And hypothetically, for those landlords that maybe after December pursue an eviction, and perhaps those landlords who pursue back rent, then you could find that kind of thing out in discovery. And if they lied, then that's another count against them for perjury. But they say they know they're signing under penalty of perjury, and unfortunately, you can't even ask. You can't ask for backup. You can't ask for them to prove it. You can't ask for anything, which seems ridiculous to me, but it's what the state of the law is.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's switch to the state situation, which on the last day, there was Directive 0025, and that basically said no residential evictions until August 31st. There were some exceptions, which we can talk about. Then on the last day, August 31st, the governor came in and said, well, we're still not ready, in part because they were allowing for a 30-day mediation for people who found themselves in summary eviction. The tenant could say, look, I'd like to mediate it for within the next 30 days. And the legislature passed that law, and it was going to be overseen by the Nevada Supreme Court, but they were not ready to have the program in place by August 31st. So for that reason and for other public policy reasons, the governor extended the protection or moratorium directive for non-payment of rent through the summary eviction process of residential only. I want to be clear about that. Commercial evictions could start back in July 1st, actually. But he extended it for residential till October 14th. And in hearing the state treasurer speak, the state was actually even caught by surprise that the CDC order came out. So what's happened is we have this kind of juxtaposition of which rule is going to be enforced. And the CDC order says, look, if a state provides a more restrictive standard, then the state law will control. If the federal is more restrictive, then the federal controls. So they've kind of left this gray area of, does the Nevada rule apply because it's more restrictive and versus the CDC order? And I'll tell you that the Attorney General who was on the call I was on would not answer. They tried to ask him 3 different ways and he refused to answer. He just said, it's going to be a case-by-case decision by each judge, blah, blah. So it's clearly a gray area. There's a scenario where because one of the exceptions to the order 0025 was for if a lease had expired, you could give a 30-day notice, follow it up with a 5-day, and evict, what everyone calls a no-cause eviction. I know that from my experience with Home 365, there are some courts that didn't enforce that, although it looked pretty clear in the language to me. Didn't enforce the no cause eviction, citing in part this extension of 031. I don't read it that way, but I don't have a black robe. I just wear a suit to work sometimes. So where we stand in Nevada is you cannot evict until October 15th for non-payment of rent. And let me switch slides here. And there's penalties for a Nevada violation as well. The governor says it's going to be considered coercion under the deceptive trade practices, which none of us want to be involved with. Those have civil penalties. The Attorney General has the authority to enforce them. And very importantly for this audience, there are separate penalties that are pretty severe if the claimant, if the tenant over 60 or disabled, and that comes up with tenants, quite often. So in general, the Attorney General's office would file a complaint and come after somebody. But if it's a disabled person or an elderly person, they can hire counsel and do it themselves. So the governor is telling us here, hey, if you violate, you're going to be subject to a complaint for deceptive trade practices. This was from 0025, which just merely got extended. What the governor said when he extended the moratorium till September was, look, folks, rent is still due. And I've said that over and over again. It's clear on the face of what the state of Nevada has done. Back rent is still due. You can't evict for it, which kind of takes away all the teeth of it, but it's still due. We strongly encourage landlords and tenants to enter into this lease addendum and a promissory note. And the Attorney General's office actually prepared it, attached it, and lots of people have been kind of using it maybe in somewhat of a modified form. So in July, when that came down, the governor said, let's work it out, folks. Those that did, it became binding, and a future breach could be utilized as a grounds for eviction. And so that was the status then. The CDC law now kind of throws that all into question as to whether tenants perceive that they should make some kind of arrangement, because they're saying, well, you can't evict me until December. I'll take my chances then. And as we know, most folks don't have a ton of savings, and a lot of folks lost their jobs. They got unemployment and so forth. They're not going to have April through December rent sitting around in a bank account ready to pay and square up when the moratorium is lifted. So we're still going to be facing a wave of evictions when ultimately the government takes the handcuffs off. I just this is from 0025, which then got extended until October 15th. Now, they're saying that these were allowed evictions, and specifically summary evictions based on continued possession after expiration of a term. So these are your no-cause evictions. You can't use it as an excuse for non-payment, but you have these 4 bases to be able to evict under Nevada law. And arguably, if you do so before the October 15 deadline and you don't get the affidavit from the tenant, you could complete it. That's the end of my presentation with slides. This is kind of my contact information. Daniel, I'd like to hit just a couple of do's and don'ts and make sure that I've been clear. The CDC rule runs from 9/4 of 20 till 12/31 of 20. The state rule runs from September 1st through October 14th. The question of whether our law is more restrictive is up in the air. And then to remind folks that if they do commence the process under the state system, the tenant can ask for a 30-day stay because of mediation. These are not my stats. These came, I think, from the treasurer. About 95% of renters in Clark County would qualify for the affidavit, making less than $100,000. So it's going to be an overwhelming statistical number. And then his statistics were that of owners, 85% of owners of rentals in Nevada, and Clark County in particular, 85% would qualify for the government hold off on their mortgage if they have one, for Fannie, Freddie, and then there's broad language in there that talks about or government backed. And government backed is code for a commercial backed securities. As a lot of us know, the government ends up backstopping a lot of these loans. So where does that kind of leave us? What's kind of my best takeaway advice? And then I'll answer the rest of the questions. You cannot evict for non-payment of rent in Nevada, period. If you're going to move forward, you should be careful not to run afoul of the CDC rule. And my best advice, everyone can talk with their own attorney, but my best advice is that if you receive that affidavit, you would have to stop immediately. You can't use any of these processes. The state order uses the word subterfuge. You can't use it as an end around. What can you do? I think and I'm sure most everybody on this call and video would have done this, but try to get your tenants to take advantage and apply for and receive the relief that's out there. Everybody on the call I was on was complaining that there's funds still available in Nevada through various programs that aren't being utilized. And because a lot of the tenants either don't know about them or don't apply for them. You basically, as the property manager, can do everything for them except sign. It's not illegal, it's not untoward. So, you can lead the horse to water, not make them drink, but you can get them pretty darn close. The other thing I would say is, a lot of these references are to the summary eviction process, and I don't want to get too technical, but basically we have 2 processes in Nevada. A summary eviction process, which is faster, cheaper, and in normal times goes very well. But there are a lot of roadblocks there, including now that all someone has to do is say, I have a defense, and the current Judge Pro Tem is very pro-tenant. My recommendation would be, even though it's a little more costly and a little slower, that you utilize the unlawful detainer process by going to court. You'll be assigned a different judge than him. And if you are also suing, say, for back rents at the same time, you can even find yourself in district court where you may have a more favorable audience. And I already said that if the lease has expired and you give notice, you can start down that road, just knowing whatever you spend to get there could be stopped if they give the affidavit. And I would just say, look, I empathize as a property owner myself, that it's very frustrating for folks to have bills continue to come in, have tenants still have, I know you have service calls and so forth that you have to answer and money you have to put into the properties. But I think, the government has spoken loudly and clearly on this, and I think we're all kind of stuck until the end of the year for the most part. There are some possible workarounds, but they come with, some risk and some price. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Few questions, like a couple minutes, not more than 5 if possible. There is a question. Can a landlord enter in various creative solutions with the tenant, like trying to offer moving out of the property to a different property, finance some of the moving costs, maybe settle on reducing the debt? Is that allowed to get into to enter into negotiation without evicting?
Yes, absolutely. The only caveat I would have there is no express or implied threat of the or else. And you don't want the tenant to be able to say, well, I felt coerced. But absolutely, and in our sister state in California, those kinds of things happen all the time. They pay moving expenses, they pay first month's rent, especially in control situations. So there's nothing prohibiting that. The main thing here is to not send people evicted to homelessness or into very, shelters or densely populated places.
I guess that any effort of that nature would be perceived nicely by the courts if that goes down the road to the eviction later on. Any effort.
I think so. And I also think that it's very wise to keep those communications in writing. I know obviously some of them will take place verbally, but it'll be worth everyone's while to follow up with an email or whatever communication the tenant uses.
Right. There's another question, last one, I think. Does that apply also for commercial real estate?
Which part?
I mean, all of the no eviction part.
No. The evictions were lifted for commercial real estate as of July 1st.
Okay. Understood. Unless there are no other questions, John, I would love to thank you so much. Very informative. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And definitely, I guess that folks that have more information needed will be able to contact you directly. This recording will be available and your details are there. So, yeah.
Very good. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, John. So with actually with no further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Philippe Bouchard, who is a Senior Business Development Officer at Stewart Title. He's an experienced account director with a demonstrated history of working in the real estate industry. Mr. Bouchard is skilled in real estate, transaction investment properties, short sales, foreclosures, single-family homes. He holds a bachelor degree focused in political science and government from University of Utah. He has testified in districts and federal courts proceedings as person most knowledgeable and custodian of records. He also works as an expert witness, offering expert opinion on title and escrow issues. He was chosen by his peers to chair the board of trustees of Clark County Title Services. He also regularly teaches classes to realtors and mortgage lenders. And as a sales executive at Stewart Title, one of his primary responsibilities is to schedule and teach educational courses to the company's clientele. Philip graduated from the Dale Carnegie Management Training Course and BSA's The Trainer's Edge, and we're honored to have him here to review the state of the Las Vegas market for us to understand what's going on and where it's heading. Mr. Bouchard, thank you so much, and please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. John, thank you very much for the information on the legal situation with evictions right now. Appreciate that. So I'm going to get into, and we're going to go through basically a series of screens where I'm going to show you what the market's doing today. I think it's important to understand that in addition to the government restrictions that John talked about, there's been additional restrictions imposed here in Nevada by both the state and the federal government. And in addition to the eviction moratorium, we've also been dealing with the foreclosure moratorium. And I believe, and John can help me out here maybe in the chat, I believe the state of Nevada foreclosure moratorium has ended, but the GSEs as well as FHA and VA still have a moratorium on foreclosures. And I believe that most of the title companies will not or are not willing to insure a property right now that's been through a foreclosure. I've been inundated since mid-March with requests for foreclosure reports, and there just aren't any. The list that's produced for me from a data source, it shows up every week, and there's a couple of commercial foreclosures and some foreclosures on homeowners association lanes, but nothing on residential property right now. I don't know that that's all that important to our market, because with the equity position that people have developed over the last several years, I don't think we're going to see a wave of foreclosures. I could be wrong, but the equity position in the Valley, Las Vegas Valley right now is much, much different than it was 7, 8, well, been a little bit longer than that, about 12, 13 years ago when the Great Recession hit here in Las Vegas in early 2007. We have very different dynamics now than we did then. And now, because of the down payments that were required on properties and then the subsequent appreciation, most folks, most homeowners here in the Valley have a really good equity position. And if are unable through lack of employment or perhaps a strategy to get out of their home, it wouldn't be a foreclosure generally, nor would it be a short sale because of the equity position. They would just be able to sell their home. Another factor that's impacted our market that's based upon government regulation is realtors have not been able to show properties that are tenant occupied. So the fact that we can't evict tenants and the fact that we can't show those properties has diminished the inventory a little bit here in Las Vegas. It's not solely responsible for the lack of inventory, and we're going to get into in a few minutes looking at the inventory situation here in Las Vegas, which is primarily the factor that's driving the market. The source of the data that you're going to see, or the sources of the data, are the multiple listing service here in Las Vegas, and then my friends at Sales Track. You may know them as Applied Analysis, Jeremy Aguero and Brian Gordon, both very well respected analysis here in Nevada, and they own a company called Sales Track, which is their real estate division. So what happened here in Nevada? We were rolling 2019. We had an exceptionally strong market. It continued into early 2020. We really didn't even see much of a reduction in sales during the slow seasonal periods that we usually have, November through January. It did tick down just a little bit, but not anything near the seasonal norms. So as we approached March, and it was mid-March, I recall that the pandemic really hit here in Nevada. Well, I'm not so sure when the pandemic hit. That's a difficult thing to know or understand. But the government shutdowns happened very quickly thereafter, which created some subsequent market conditions. Not only were there government restrictions, but we have to remember that many individuals didn't know how they were going to conduct business, even if they had been deemed essential. The real estate industry was one that was deemed essential. But that doesn't mean that because they were essential that they were getting up and running out of their houses every morning. I'm talking about real estate professionals, to continue to do what they had always done. A lot of folks had concerns for their personal health and for their family's health, and were just unwilling to work. So we had a lot of real estate professionals early in the pandemic that, one, were afraid of health conditions and stayed home and quit working, and two, anticipated that the market would just have nothing to offer them in the way of making any money, and so they stayed home for that reason as well. I think what we'll see in a few minutes is they were very wrong that the market was going to stall or shut down or slow down. Quite the contrary. So let's get into these screens for the sake of time. So here we have just a month by month, excuse me guys, I'm trying to move the people out of the way so I can see my chart a little better. Okay, so here's a pretty simple chart. Starts in January of 2020, and it shows us the volume of sales here in Clark County, Nevada. Clark County is really the Las Vegas MSA, which includes North Las Vegas, Henderson, Boulder City, and some small surrounding communities. But this will give you a volume of sales. Now, January, February, and March, as you can see that uptick, that looks like a normal year here in Southern Nevada. We're a little slow in the winter months, and then we start to tick up and really get strong March through August of every year, and then start to tick back down a little bit in the fall and then the winter. Now, I want you to know, and I didn't just for the sake of not having it, I wanted to have really easy to understand and visually attractive graphs, so I didn't make a lot of comparisons, but I want you to understand that we started January of 2020 with probably a 20% higher volume of sales than we have in years past. So we started off kind of rolling in January. With the pandemic hitting in mid-March, that it really didn't give time for people that were closing real estate transaction in March to give much thought to it. And most of those folks, with a little bit of, with a lot of trepidation, moved forward and closed their real estate transactions. So those folks that had purchased in February or early March and were anticipating on closing the last couple of weeks of March or early April, most of them, as you can see, continued to do that. There were a lot of questions. I think that my clientele, real estate professionals and me, we received a lot of questions from consumers as to what other people were doing. I think individuals that were buying property wanted to know if other people were moving forward, and in fact they were. So that's why we've got the really good numbers in March. But then obviously look what happens in April and May. Obviously a result of not only some government restrictions, but mostly people afraid of the pandemic and not knowing what the real estate market's going to do. So those 2 months really slowed down. And most of us in the real estate profession here believed that that trend was going to continue throughout the remainder of the year. We didn't see any reason why, with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people not working, we didn't understand how there was going to continue to be a real estate market. Now, we did realize that going into the pandemic, there were really strong factors bearing on the market, and that was generally a lack of inventory issue. And of all the factors that we could talk about that impact the real estate market, the amount of inventory, at least here in Southern Nevada, is going to be the factor that bears strongest on the market and is actually compensating for some other factors. So you can see here that in August of 2020, there were a lot of properties that closed. And I can tell you that it's not quite to the level of last year, but it's very, very close. We are only off about 8% from the volume of sales in 2019. Really hard to understand, but we'll talk about some of the dynamics that created that. A group that I've been working with for several years here in town, it's a group of investors and their real estate professionals and a couple of economists have been tracking the market week by week. Something we've never done here in Southern Nevada. Usually a monthly trend is good for us, or to know in retrospect, a month and a half, what was going on gives us adequate time to adjust our efforts in our application to the real estate market. I guess now would be a good time for me to share my theory that there's no such thing as a good or a bad market in real estate. We just have to understand what the market is, what the dynamics are, and then how to apply ourselves to be successful. A really good real estate market for the consumers may be not a good market for the investors and vice versa. So let's not think that anything that I'm going to show you today indicates a good market or a bad market. It should just maybe help you figure out how you would apply your efforts and your resources to the market. So this is a chart here, and like I said, it goes week by week since the beginning of the pandemic or the government shutdown, and goes through a very recent time, 9/21. And what we're looking at are properties on the market. So we've got the little blue line that shows cancellations. That's been pretty stable. And if we were to track that back a year or two, it would look very, very similar. Those combined with the new listings on the market, which the week of 9/21 were, the week ending 9/21, were 1,063 new listings. That's just 1 week. So we've got a total of 1,336 new listings on the market. That's a pretty high volume. We haven't seen, as much as we anticipated, people holding off on selling their home. What the real estate professionals, I believe, have been sharing with folks that have some thoughts on selling would be now's the time to do it, because the market is so tight with inventory, as we'll see here in a few minutes when we get to those screens, that generally if you price a property right, there's going to be multiple offers on it and it's going to sell almost immediately. May not be the case if we see more inventory coming on. That number of 1,336 new listings going on the market, as you'll see, is the third highest since the beginning of the pandemic. And as you can see, the trend lines, they're both going up. Okay, both for new listings and total new listings. All right, here's units sold. Okay, those are these listings that have been marketed and we found buyers for them. And the red line, the blue line are solds. The red obviously is under contract and then back on market. So not listings, but properties that have actually sold. Look at the trend lines here too. So under contract, the trend line is up, and the solds, the trend line is going down a little bit. But if you look at the pattern here, folks, you'll kind of notice, and I don't know why this is, but everybody that buys or sells real estate wants to close at the end of the month, right? So the title insurance companies that close deals, we're kind of the bottom of the funnel for that. We kind of somewhat limp along for the first 3 weeks of the month, and then the last week of the month, we really close a lot of deals. So you'll kind of see those trend lines ticking up, dropping back down the first of the month, and then going back up. But what this shows is we're still closing a lot of property here in Southern Nevada. Okay, we're going to get into inventory now. This is the factor, folks, that's really having the largest impact on our market. We, for quite some time here in Southern Nevada, have had a really bad inventory situation. Well, I would say bad, depends upon who you are. If you're a seller, it's an amazing inventory situation. If you're a buyer, it's a little bit difficult because there's not a whole lot of property for buyers to look at. And that's not a new trend. It's not a pandemic trend. I am told that a balanced real estate market, a balanced market between buyer and seller, is going to be 6 months worth of inventory. I don't think we've been at 6 months in the regular people, I'll call it, price range. When we get up above $1 million, we see a little bit more inventory. But even for most of 2019, we were dealing with between 3 and 4 months of inventory. So a little bit of a seller's market. And that trend has continued to tighten up. And I kind of wanted to give you some numbers specifically in certain market ranges, because this webinar, I think, is intended to speak to investments. And this is the lower price range tend to be the properties that we invest in. So this is under $275,000 inventory in a community of better than a couple of million people. It amazes me that we've got 755 single-family properties on the market in the week ending 9/21, and sold was just 146. This market under 275, I think, is going away really quickly because of the increased values. We're kind of getting into a situation like some of the other metro statistical areas where entry-level housing is either multifamily housing, condominiums largely, or there really isn't entry-level housing anymore. That's something that we were dealing with prior to the Great Recession, and we're dealing with now again. Next slide. This is inventory from 275 to 500. Still a price range where we find ourselves buying and holding or buying and flipping investment properties. And again, keep in mind, Las Vegas is a large metro area, not as large as some in California, but certainly a large metro area in the Southwest. And these numbers are really, really incredible that we only have this much property available. And this is 275 to 500. All right, so let's get into months supply. Remember a few minutes ago I talked about, and this is what the red line indicates, that a balanced market, meaning that buyers and sellers, neither a buyer or a seller has an opportunity or an advantage over the other, as indicated by market conditions. It would just be, you know, a stable market where somebody puts their home on the market to sell, and somewhere in the course of 6 months it sells. I have to tell you, in Las Vegas, 6 months would seem like an eternity. If somebody put their home on the market and listed it with a real estate professional and it didn't sell for 6 months, that real estate professional would not get a subsequent opportunity to sell the property and probably would get bashed all over social media and within the friends of that homeowner, because unless your home is worth $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.8 million, it should just sell really fast. So look at this trend line, folks. We're looking at right now, and this includes those really expensive homes. This is not a price range specific chart, and we have 1.8 months of inventory on the market here in Las Vegas. Remember, I told you that in the million plus range, it's over 7 months right now. So that's included in the 1.8. So at the lower price range, in the middle price range, this right here, folks, is the factor that's driving our market right now. Well, one of the primary factors. We'll talk about interest rates here in a few minutes, and that's primarily the other factor. So look at that. Going into the recession, very little inventory. It picked up a little bit, I think, because people were still putting properties on the market. New home builders were still offering inventory, and buyers slowed down for just a minute. Just a minute. Okay, here is in the 275 price range, month supply. Again, look how far up that red line is. That's the stable market. 1.2 months under 275,000. That's not very many properties. And I would imagine that some of you have felt this as you've tried to acquire investment properties in this market. You'll find yourself in a difficult position because most of the time in an investment price range, there are multiple offers on the property. And where investors, I think, have an advantage now, as they did several years ago, is if you're a cash buyer, that really gives the seller some peace of mind that you'll be able to complete the transaction. Whereas if you were borrowing, you may not be able to because of restrictions with lending. Okay, so let's talk about the factors that are weighing on the market, and those slides will be available for everybody. And I have more if anybody wants to really drill down into the specifics of the market, but I kind of wanted to keep it big picture today and a little bit brief. But you know what, actually, before I move on, are there any questions?
Doesn't seem so right now.
Okay, so I'm either doing a really good job or a really,
awesome job.
or a really bad job. Yes, okay, there's no question.
You're doing great. You're doing
Okay,
great.
so inventory is the issues. We've talked about in the world of supply and demand, the most basic, business formula in Southern Nevada. We're not going to see prices dropping until the inventory issue is resolved. I know that. Well, I'll tell you a little story. My wife went and got her haircut yesterday. She told me this horrible situation. This really sweet young lady that I've known since she was like born. She and her husband have sold their home because it's a great seller's market. They sold it the first day they put it on the market, and they've moved into a trailer in their parents' backyard because they're really sure that either after the election or after the first of the year, prices are going to plummet in Las Vegas. And I felt really bad for those people, and I called them and just shared my opinion. I don't believe prices are going to plummet because of the inventory situation. We could dump a ton of inventory into the Las Vegas market, and as you can see, the demand would gobble it up. And another factor that's bearing on the market right now, I don't think I had a slide for it, is that interest rates are at historic lows right now. So buyers have more purchasing power than they've had in the history of anybody tracking what interest rates are. Going into mid to late last year, interest rates were at historic lows. There was a huge refi boom, and guess what? Those people, you people, me, we've probably refinanced again because the rates have ticked down to somewhere between 2 and 3% for most consumers. Between inventory and interest rates being almost free, that's why we believe that we see the volume of sales that we see right now. And like I explained to this nice young couple the other night on the phone, if prices do, let's call it correct. Everybody likes that. Although I'm going to show you a slide that property values never correct. They always go up. Unless there's some kind of mishap, that these young people would be in more of a predicament at the end of the year if prices dropped 10% and interest rates went up, let's say 1.5%. They would lose purchasing power because the interest rate increase would have more of an impact on their monthly payment and qualifying ability than a reduction of the real estate values would offer an opportunity. So. We've got a couple of other factors that are creating a really strong market right now, and that's inward migration. We've had historically a huge inward migration into Southern Nevada. People like our community, they like our weather. Although if they were here this summer, they may change their minds on that. It seemed to be a little hot and dry. And I'm told that 15% of the people that are leaving the major metro areas in California are finding themselves moving to Southern Nevada. And what I'm told will happen on an increasing rate because of the social dynamics that we're dealing with right now, we'll call them political and social dynamics. People are going to be leaving the major metro areas, moving to smaller metro areas. That's what we are. And some people will be leaving the smaller metro areas and moving rural to accommodate the lifestyle that they want to live, trying to get away perhaps from the government restrictions in the area that they're in. And we anticipate Californians pouring into Southern Nevada at an increasing rate, as well as people from the Northeast, places where it's really, really cold all winter. So as long as we have this inward migration, we're going to continue to have the demand. Not to mention the investor demand that you folks create. This is something that we deal with occasionally in Southern Nevada. I anticipate we're going to be dealing with it now and in the near future, and here's why. During the Great Recession, the hardest hit industry was real estate and home building. We had lots and lots of people move out of our community to go find work elsewhere. In areas that were not hard hit economically as Nevada. So construction picked back up in Nevada, so some people came back and people coming into the industry. I can tell you that historically, I'm kind of an older guy and I grew up here in Las Vegas, the construction workers were a bit migratory. These weren't the people that you saw living next door for 15, 20 years. They would kind of come and go as the construction demand supplied work for them. And then when it didn't, they would leave. We've had some situations, and we're still experiencing those situations that are going to add to a labor shortage, or create and then add to a labor shortage. And we've been watching those on TV. The fires that are burning in California, the floods and hurricanes that are happening in the South, somebody's going to have to rebuild those communities. And the people that go, much like the healthcare professionals that went to the hardest hit areas early in the pandemic, were banking big money. We had a huge population of medical professionals here in Nevada that left to go make money in New York. And we're going to have a huge population of construction people that are going to go to California and to the South to rebuild those communities that have been devastated. And that's going to create a labor shortage here in Southern Nevada. So builders are going to have a very difficult time producing the inventory to keep up with the demand as people move into our community. I wanted to share this. This is kind of historical and not really perhaps relevant to it. Well, it's certainly not relevant to a pandemic. But before a pandemic, one of the limiting factors of our community, we always knew it was going to be water. And in Southern Nevada, 7 of every 10 residents relies on the Southern Nevada Water Authority for their water, and largely the Southern Nevada Water Authority gets its water from the Colorado River. Growing up here in Las Vegas, I always thought that was our water. Hell, it's our dam. We built it, and it seems like we should get the water created from that. That's not the case. We get very little. I think we get less than 5% of the water from the Colorado River, because Colorado gets water, Arizona, and then a huge amount of that water goes to California for residential, commercial, and agricultural uses. But we're 90% reliant upon the Colorado River here in Southern Nevada for our water. And we've been experiencing a drought for going on 20 years now. So at some point, this is also going to be a limiting factor that will bear on the real estate market, because there's only going to be so many people that will be able to live in Southern Nevada. Water's obviously necessary. Now, over the last 15 years, the Southern Nevada Water Authority has done an amazing job at getting Southern Nevadans to buy into conservation efforts. And we're using less water now as a community than we did when there was 1 million people. But you can see from the picture here that we've got issues with Lake Mead, and if those continue, this was a good year. The water level's higher than anticipated, but 1 year doesn't necessarily end the drought. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in. Now, this is what the last slide I'm going to show you, and I wanted you to see this, and it ends in 18, but that's okay. Those lines would continue to go up for the next 2 years. I want you to see that in Southern Nevada, property values increase. We've had, if this chart went back a little bit further, you would see that other than the Great Recession, there's only been one reduction in property values in Southern Nevada over about a 45, 50-year period. And the other period was a couple of months during the summer, so it wasn't really a big deal. But other than the Great Recession that we experienced, we haven't had a decline in property values in Vegas. I believe that all of us, because especially those of us here in Las Vegas in the real estate industry or the title insurance industry, have been really concerned. We're really gun shy because of that last recession. It just seems like we can't get past it in our minds. It's kind of a big resounding fear, I guess, that we're somehow going to get back to that. And so I'm being asked repeatedly, ooh, when is the bubble going to burst, Phil? Because property values are back up. Do you know that for the last 3 months in Southern Nevada, we've had record high median home prices? We're up above 335 now, which way exceeds this chart that you're looking at the peak values in 2006. So we've exceeded that, and 3 months in a row, the median home price has gone up, and we're now at about $335,000. Let's look at the bubble. From 2004, well, we can go back to 2003, a 5-year period, the market skyrockets and crashes. That's what a bubble looks like, okay? We hit bottom in 2011, and look what's happened subsequent. And you can just imagine 2019 and 20 are two blue bars that go higher than the one in 2018. So that's not a bubble. That's a 10-year, 10-year period of steady appreciation and growth. That's not, I like the visual because you can see a bubble from 2004 to 2008, and then you can't see that in the subsequent years because it's just a steady increasing of value over time. This is what I meant earlier when I said I don't believe we're going to see a wave of foreclosures. So because of the equity position, these increased values is people are paying down their mortgages. And remember, these are mortgages at really low interest rates. So they're amortizing very quickly. And in addition to that, property values have gone up. So we've got a really good equity position here in the Valley. And that, I believe, folks, is really where I would like to end my presentation. And if there's any questions, I guess I could field those now.
Any questions, guys? You're just getting compliments in the chat. I think it was a very comprehensive overview of the market. Thank you so much, Philip. And if anyone else has any further question, you are more than welcome to reach to Philip or to us, and we'll help you with the information that you might need. Thank you so much. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
So just to conclude, two more points, two more slides about how we as a management company cope with the problems with the current situation. Pretty much our day-to-day work right now is quite challenging. We need to understand, and we invest quite a lot of resources in understanding what are the various regulations here, state and federal. It limits us in the way we can act. And this thing is constantly changing, and like John said before, sometimes there is a lot of misalignment between the federal and the state, and as well as some misalignments with messaging as well. We were gearing up to start our eviction processes and reaching out to tenants, which we did for the last quarter, trying to settle on various deferment plans. And we're gearing towards the end of August to start doing that. We actually reached out and were successful in working closely with tenants and signed around 20% of the delinquent customers on deferment plans. But since this extension of moratorium happened the last hour of the end of August, basically from that point on, we almost not getting any positive, I would say, success working with tenants, trying to get them to sign those deferment plans. It's simply because we have harder time to leverage our demands. When we had this date in sight, basically they were collaborating quite nicely, but we are keeping on doing that thing. We are communicating the landlords, all the information we're getting from John or from whoever we can get this information from. But we also direct information to our tenants in terms of various relief programs that are available there, as well as we have basically come up with the security deposit financing plan, where we as Home 365, as a company, we are actively taking the risk on your behalf, pretty much, as landlords, and we are guaranteeing in a way those security deposits, but we are paying them back to people that have that hardship, and financing those security deposits with a small monthly fee, but pretty much helping people to get some of their parked money back so they can pay their rents and debt. So we are actively participating in this situation. And I must tell that this helps quite a lot to people, and we have quite a lot of applications. We're not able to offer it to everyone, but definitely we are trying to do it with the most applicants that we are getting. So pretty much we are investing a lot in proactive and preventive maintenance to reduce the number of times service professionals need to get into the property. Just last 2 months, we have invested, I mean, not last 2 months, the beginning of the summer, we invested quite almost $50,000 in serving various AC systems just before the summer in the middle of pandemic. So people will, your tenants will not experience any hardship with that regard. We are seeing quite an active leasing market. People are moving. Following the question that we had before, shall we offer tenants various ways to move from a more expensive properties to a less expensive properties? So definitely we see that happens in the market. We have a pretty active leasing process right now, and we are filling vacancies pretty fast. But our day-to-day work is quite challenging right now, even as a company where most of us are working from home, and there are lots of various restrictions on dispatching service professionals, a lot of tenant issues, related to the non-payments. So pretty much that creates quite a lot of friction that we hadn't experienced before. We haven't experienced that. Added on top of on our regular job, and that creates quite another layer of complexity. But we are dealing with this. Definitely not regular times right now. So, you've heard John, what can be done. The main thing before you take any decision, or before you reach out to tenants, and we've seen landlords reaching out to tenants directly, doing illegal things, please consult with us. We have John, a direct connection with John here, and we are actually not doing almost anything without consulting and having John review what we do. So we are acting under legal advice, pretty much everything that we do here. So in order to avoid those crazy penalties of hundreds of thousands of dollars, don't do anything without talking to us first. We keep on offering security deposit financing to people, especially to cover their lost rents. And we are stepping eventually into their shoes. It's pretty crazy as a management company to do that, to take that risk on ourselves, but definitely something that helps everyone here. Landlords and tenants and ourselves, definitely, we don't take that risk for free, but we believe that this is the right way to help everyone to have a win-win situation here. We are keep on working with tenants, constantly reaching out to them, either through emails, phone calls, text messages, constantly talking about their debt. And that results in, right now, we are experiencing around 9% of non-payment. It's quite high, I would say, but that's within the averages in Las Vegas, a little bit better than the averages. And but still, it's quite a lot of money. Think about it: 9% of almost 7 months of not payment of rents. So that's basically sums up to a decent amount of money, which we are chasing daily. We believe that there are high chances, but again, just a belief. We are seeing various discussions that there will be a federal or state aid directly to landlords. This is why, if I were a landlord, I personally would really seriously consider not waiving any debt, or definitely not trying to, at this point, maybe be super creative on this, unless you really need to act for whatever reasons. But I would believe that at a certain point, when those moratoriums are lifted towards the end of the year, this is going to be a major problem the government needs to deal with. And the extension is mainly done, the way I understand it, and the way we understand it, is to gear up and to get ready with various plans how to help landlords and tenants and prevent homelessness at a massive scale across the United States. So I guess that this might be into your favor going forward. We also saw that when there was a date and reaching towards that date of lifting the moratoriums and no eviction policy, we saw people settling. Like the 20% I mentioned before, this is where they started to pay. This is where they signed those deferment agreements. The leverage of date in a site helps us a lot with what we do. There are some interesting initiatives right now. Credit reporting agencies are starting to report non-payments of rents and impact the credit scores. I don't know how legal this is, and we haven't talked with John about it, but we are getting reached by those agencies right now, specifically asking for this information, partially as a leverage for those tenants to pay their rent on time. You don't evict them, but this is another leverage. And again, something that we need to explore. We are talking to them right now. And this might be, if this is legal, this might be a nice leverage, call it weapon here. We don't renew leases for delinquent tenants. It's month to month. We believed up until the end of August that we have the right to evict people after placing a notice of 30 days. We even went to a court with one case and it was rejected. Partially because of technicality, but I believe it's due to the general spirit in the courts, not evicting people because of non-payment of rent, and not extending lease is pretty much along those lines, and John discussed about that. So pretty much, our hands are pretty tight right now. We can't do much besides contacting people, constantly asking them how they can pay, offering them repayment plans, but definitely we cannot threaten with evictions. We cannot even press anything along those lines. So you should know that we're doing our best here to represent you, the landlords, on your behalf with anything that we can. And if at any point you have a question and you need our help and you want to get more clarity about what we're doing and how your tenants are responding, we're here for you, and we'll overcome this thing together. Our team here and everywhere across the continents are all geared up and ready to help with whatever we can. So unless, guys, you have any further questions, I think we are just 4 minutes ahead of time. So
Daniel, if you can mention, please, how to contact us. What's the best way?
The best way, obviously, to contact us is through our online forums. This is where all of those forums are being assigned to the right professional, and we can track our response times. It's much better than emails or WhatsApp messages or whatever, which we are sometimes flooded and not able to monitor. But as a tech company, we're constantly measuring data, and part of what we are doing is to improve our quality of service, which means response times. We know that sometimes, especially due to the overwhelming amount of activities that we're having, especially due to the pandemic, we are sometimes missing our targets. But just to make everyone sure that we are constantly doing whatever we can to improve that. And definitely, we're all here to make your investments successful ones. So unless you have any further questions,
you can find this button online. It's called Get Help or Get Support.
Right. And another thing, we do have a section there for COVID-related information, with all the information for tenants, where to get help, how to apply with various plans to the state, to the federal government, and as well for you as landlords with typical questions and answers, FAQs, whatever new information we have. You certainly get our email communications as soon as we know something. But again, feel free to reach out directly.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for attending. It was a pleasure hosting you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Philip, for your time and for the great overview. It was very helpful, I think, and would love to keep on working with you guys together going forward, growing our business and your business mutually. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course.